The sky was the color of old ash, stretched wide and low, pressing down on the scrubland. Wind blew dry through the yucca, whistling over rust-colored hills, across the vast, godless plain. Nothing moved but dust and brittle weeds, skittering like bones. A lone wagon creaked across the earth, drawn by a tired gray gelding, its ribs showing under a matted coat. The woman sitting atop the buckboard looked as though she had not slept in days. Her face was drawn tight, lips chapped and cracked, hands raw where they gripped the reins. Her children, 2 boys and a girl, huddled in the back beneath a threadbare quilt, eyes wide but silent, as if they'd learned early the cost of noise. The older boy held the girl close, his face half hidden behind a scarf dark with soot. The smaller boy stared at the landscape like it might reach up and swallow them whole. There was no road to follow, only tracks lost in a crusted path of hoofprints and old failure. The woman's name was Sarah. Her dress was worn through at the elbows, boots patched with twine. She had buried her husband 2 weeks past, in a shallow grave just beyond the Kansas line, after the cough in his chest had turned wet and red. They had no headstone, just a cross of cedar lashed with wire, the only thing he had managed to whittle before he died. She had stood beside the grave until the sun fell. Children pressed against her skirt, and then she had turned west. Now she did not cry. There were no tears left in her, only the steady ache of forward. The wagon rocked over stones and frozen ruts. Her knuckles were white around the reins. The wind picked up again, colder now. She reached back, pulling the quilt tighter around the children. The youngest whimpered. She didn't speak. Words were too costly. By dusk, they reached the edge of a broken fence line, 3 strands of barbed wire strung crooked between leaning posts, half swallowed by prairie grass. Beyond it, a house. It sat squat and stubborn against the horizon, roof shingled with rusted tin, chimney smoking faintly. The corral beside it held 2 horses, one dark, one chestnut. A windmill turned slowly beside a water trough, the groaning of its gears lost to the open distance. Sarah pulled the horse to a stop. The gelding stamped once, then stilled, sides heaving. For a long moment she sat without moving, heart thudding so loud she thought maybe the children could hear it. Then the door of the house creaked open, and a man stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, coat heavy on him, wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His face was shadowed in the dying light, but his posture was still, measured, not reaching for a weapon, not shouting, just waiting, watching. Sarah climbed down from the wagon, her legs trembling, knees locking. Her voice rasped like sand. "Are you the one who sent word?" The man gave a small nod. He stepped off the porch, boots crunching gravel, and walked toward the fence. "Name's Eli," he said. His voice was low, rough. "You're Sarah." He said it not as a question, but like he already knew. She nodded once. He looked past her to the wagon. "These all yours?" "Mine and John's," she said. "He's gone." Eli nodded, slow and respectful. "I'm sorry." She looked down, brushing dirt from her dress that wouldn't come off. "You said you needed help." "I said I had room," Eli answered. "And work, if someone was willing." She turned her head slightly toward the children, who now sat up under the quilt, peering out like feral creatures. Her voice cracked when she said, "They haven't eaten since morning. Bring them in." He turned toward the house. "Stove's still warm. There's beans and bread. I can put on more." She hesitated. The oldest boy climbed out. Then the others followed. The little girl grabbed her mother's hand. "Mom," she whispered, voice trembling, "is this our new home?" Sarah looked up at the house again. The roof sloped like tired shoulders. The porch sagged under its own weight. But smoke rose from the chimney, and there was light behind the window. She looked down at her daughter, then nodded. "You're safe here." Eli held the door open as they entered, the heat washing over them like a second chance. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and flour and old leather. The stove in the corner glowed orange, casting long shadows across the plank floor. A tin kettle hissed gently, steam curling up toward the low-beamed ceiling. The children moved slow, uncertain, their eyes wide. Sarah kept close behind them, her body drawn tight like wire. The warmth felt too sudden, too much like kindness, and she did not know what to do with it. Eli moved without rush. He fetched bowls from a shelf above the counter, his movements careful, methodical. He didn't speak unless it was needed. When he handed Sarah a mug, it was filled with something hot and dark, bitter but real. She drank it in silence, standing near the stove, her hands shaking so she had to hold the mug with both. The children ate as if they'd forgotten how. No one asked for seconds, but Eli gave them anyway. When the little girl, Josie, spilled beans down her chin, Eli offered a cloth without a word. When the youngest, Caleb, dropped his bread, Eli picked it up, brushed off the floor dust, and handed it back like it was nothing. No scolding, no loudness. Just quiet motion. Afterward, Eli showed them to the back room small, with a narrow bed and a mattress of hay and wool set in the corner. Blankets folded neatly. A Bible on the shelf. Sarah looked at it longer than she meant to. "I'll take the barn," Eli said, voice low behind her. She turned. "You don't have to. It's your first night here," he said. "I reckon it'll feel strange enough without a stranger in the next room." She nodded once. Her throat ached from speaking so little for so long. The boys laid out together on the floor, wrapped in the quilt from the wagon. Josie curled beside her mother, already half asleep. Sarah tucked them in and sat down against the wall, listening to the wind press against the boards outside. Eli left without another word. Through the window, she saw him cross the yard, boots crunching, coat trailing behind him. The barn door opened and shut, swallowed by dark. She lay back and closed her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, she did not feel the need to keep one open. Morning came like a whisper, gray and cold. The stove had burned low. The children still slept, tangled in one another. Sarah rose quietly, stepping into her boots. She washed her face in the basin by the window, using water left in the pitcher. Her hands were cracked, knuckles split. She wrapped them again in cloth. Outside, Eli was already working. She found him behind the barn, splitting wood with clean, practiced swings. His shirt was damp with sweat, his hair darkened at the edges. He did not stop when he saw her, but his voice met her halfway. "I start early," he said. "Always have." "I don't mind early," Sarah replied. "Early's honest." He paused, wiping his brow with the back of his wrist. "You good with animals?" "Yes," she said. "Cows, chickens, goats. I can milk, clean stalls, gather eggs." "Good," he said. "Chores'll go faster with two." They fell into rhythm. She fed the chickens while he mucked the stalls. She scattered cornmeal in the dust, and they came running, flapping and squawking, half wild. Her hands remembered what her heart had forgotten. The work didn't fix anything, but it made the pain quieter. Later, she stood watching him fix a fence line, hammering nails with steady force. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Since spring," he said, not looking up. "My brother owned the place. He took sick, passed before harvest." "I'm sorry." He nodded but didn't respond. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable but wide. "My husband was a carpenter," she said after a while. "Built chairs, made one for each child before they could walk." "That's something," Eli said. "He died slow." Eli's hammer stopped. He looked up. "I know what that's like." They didn't say more after that. They worked until the sun was high and the sweat on their necks turned cold. She watched him when he wasn't looking. He moved like someone used to being alone, not awkward, but precise, as though no one else had ever been there to help or interfere. But there was no sharpness in him, no pride, only stillness and a kind of worn grace. By midday, they returned to the house. The children had begun to stir. Josie rubbing her eyes, the boys already bickering quietly. Sarah made biscuits from flour she found in the cupboard, using water and lard. Eli did not offer instructions. He only watched her work, then lit the stove again. When they sat to eat, the room felt less like a stranger's. Not yet a home, but no longer foreign. Later that night, as she mended a shirt by the fire, Eli spoke without turning his head. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "This place what I got, it's yours as long as you need it." Sarah's hands stilled in the fabric. She looked at the needle, then at the flames. "I don't take charity," she said. "It's not charity," he said. "It's just a place, and a man who doesn't mind company." She didn't answer, but something inside her loosened. Not all the way, but enough to breathe. Stay with us for more tales where mercy defies the rope and love outlives the law. Subscribe now. Spring came slow that year, reluctant to show itself in full. Snow clung to the hills into April, melting in mean drizzles that turned the yard to mud and filled the troughs with ice-crusted water. The days lengthened, but the cold didn't give up easy. Sarah's hands stayed raw from work, her back ached at night, but there was something steady in the ache now, something earned. She woke before the children most mornings, stoked the stove, cooked biscuits with cracked eggs and butter scraped from the bottom of Eli's stoneware crock. By the time Eli came in from feeding the horses, the kitchen was warm, the table set. Their words stayed few, but their presence began to fill the space like furniture. Solid, functional, understood. She began to know the rhythm of his movements, the way he nodded instead of speaking, how he rubbed the back of his neck when he was unsure. In turn, he began to trust her with more. Ledgers, tools, even the stubborn plow horse that had broken his last hired hand's collarbone. He watched her mend a harness one afternoon, sleeves rolled past her elbows, arms freckled with sun and dust. "You do that like you've done it 100 times. "I have," she said, not looking up. John always meant to teach the boys, but they were still too little, and someone had to keep things tied together. Eli said nothing, but she felt his gaze on her, lingering. Not in the way of a man staring, but like someone recognizing something, maybe even admiring it. The children began to settle too. The boys chopped wood and helped feed the livestock. Josie took to following Eli like a small shadow, asking questions he rarely answered but never ignored. One morning, Sarah stepped onto the porch and found him brushing Josie's hair, his big hand clumsy with the comb, but gentle as snowfall. She turned away before he saw her watching. Still, there were hard days. Caleb took a fall from the hayloft and gashed his chin. Blood soaked his shirt, and Sarah's hands trembled as she pressed the cloth to his skin. Eli had carried the boy inside, held him still while Sarah stitched the wound, her jaw clenched tight. When it was done, Eli sat outside for a long time, elbows on his knees, head bowed like he'd failed to stop it. That night, as they stood by the barn watching the sky change, she said, "You did right by him." Eli looked out across the fields. "I never had children." "You don't have to," she said. "They'll love you anyway." The wind rose up from the lowlands, warm now, carrying the smell of green things. He turned to her, face in half shadow, something unsure flickering behind his eyes. "You're not just passing through, are you?" She didn't answer right away. Her hand brushed the fence post, fingers curling around it like an anchor. "I don't have anywhere else." "That's not what I meant." She looked at him then. "I know." Their closeness lingered, unspoken but felt in the air between them, not rushed, not declared, just a breath held a little longer than before. But peace has short legs on the plains. It can't run fast from the past. The first letter arrived folded in thirds, left by a writer at the gate. Sarah found it nailed to the post with a clean iron tack. The handwriting was stiff and sharp. "Sarah, you left without a word. You're still my wife. I'm coming for what's mine." There was no name, but she knew the hand. Her stomach clenched. That night, she sat on the porch with the letter in her lap, the children already asleep. Eli stood beside her, silent as always. She held it out to him. He read it, his jaw tightening. His voice was quiet. "He's not dead." "No," she said. "I thought he was, or hoped, but I was wrong." Eli nodded slowly. "What do you want to do?" She shook her head. "I don't know." "We could fight it," he said, "if you want to stay." "I want peace," she said. Her voice cracked. "That's all I've ever wanted. You have it here, but not if he comes." He didn't speak again that night, just sat beside her, both of them staring into the dark. The next morning, she found the letter burned to ash in the stove. The rider came 5 days later, a black gelding, foam at the bit, hooves cutting deep into the thaw-soft earth. He wore a brown coat stained with dust and sweat, a revolver low on his hip, and a crooked smile beneath a patchy beard. His hat was pulled low, but Sarah knew him even before he crossed the fence line. Micah. She stood on the porch, hands balled at her sides, the children behind the door, the rifle resting inside the threshold. Eli came from the barn, slow, measured, wiping his hands on a rag. His steps made no noise, Micah dismounted without ceremony, looked around with something like amusement. "Well," he said, spitting into the grass, "ain't this cozy?" Sarah didn't answer. Micah stepped forward, hands loose, swagger in his walk. "Didn't figure you'd land somewhere this nice. Figured you'd be in a ditch, or selling yourself to get by." His eyes dragged over her, then over the house behind her. "Guess I underestimated you." Eli's voice came calm from the side. "You should leave." Micah turned, gave Eli a lazy once-over. "And who the hell are you?" Eli didn't move. "The man who lives here." Micah laughed. "Yeah? Looks like she's already made herself at home, so I'll be setting up next to her. That's still my wife." Sarah stepped down from the porch. Her boots sank slightly in the mud, but she stood straight. "I'm not yours. Not anymore." Micah's smile faded, eyes narrowing. "We got papers say otherwise." "Papers don't raise children," she said. "Papers don't feed 'em or hold 'em through fever or dig the grave of a baby that didn't make it." Micah flinched at that, just a twitch in the jaw. Quick, but enough. "I didn't know," he said, quieter now. "You weren't there," she said. "That's all that matters." Eli stepped between them. "You've said your piece. You ride out now, or we make it law." Micah's hand dropped near his hip, a shadow of a threat, but Eli didn't flinch. His eyes were level, steady. "I don't want trouble," Micah said finally. "You brought it," Eli answered. Micah looked at Sarah again, something bitter in his face. "You think this one's better? You think he'll stay when things get hard?" "I don't know," she said. "But he's here now, and he's kind. That's more than you ever were." Micah looked at the children through the window. Josie's face was just visible between the curtains, pale and afraid. Micah turned, spit again, and climbed back on his horse. "I ain't forgetting this," he said. "Neither will we," Eli said. And Micah rode away, not fast, but with shoulders hunched like the wind had grown teeth. That night, Sarah sat by the stove, her hands wrapped around a mug of boiled chicory. Eli sat across from her, coat still on, shoulders tense. No words passed between them for a long while. Finally, she said, "He won't be back soon. He's the kind that only fights when he knows he'll win." Eli nodded. "Still, we'll be ready." She looked at him, really looked. The scar along his temple, the thick fingers calloused by years of work. The quiet way he had made space for her pain without demanding to fix it. The way he had stepped between her and danger without ceremony, like it was nothing at all. "I never expected this," she said. "Me neither," he said. She smiled barely. "What did you expect?" He leaned back in the chair. "To work the land until it killed me. Maybe leave the barn standing. Maybe someone say I kept it from blowing away. And now?" He shrugged. "Now there's more than just me. That counts for something." She looked down at her hands. "I'm still afraid. Every time the wind picks up, I hear his voice. I hate that." "It'll pass," Eli said. "Not all at once, but it will." She reached across the table, touched his hand. He didn't pull away. The wind rattled the windows, but inside, the room held warm. May brought rain, and with it, the first shoots of green. Grass pushed up in thin blades through the frost-scabbed ground, and the creek behind the barn filled again, rushing over stone and bone and the detritus of winter. The children took to it like dogs, shoes kicked off, shrieking with muddy joy as they splashed in the shallows. Josie brought back tadpoles in a tin cup, insisting they'd grow into frogs she could teach to sing. Sarah watched from the porch, arms crossed against the chill, a smile pulling at her mouth before she even realized it. Her hair was longer now. She let it down at night. She had started humming again when she worked, soft tunes from her childhood that came back like echoes across a canyon. Eli stood beside her, sipping coffee gone cold. "They've grown," he said. "They're safe," she answered. "That's why." He nodded, eyes fixed on Caleb climbing a rock too big for his legs, determined not to ask for help. Sarah tilted her head. "You ever think about having your own?" Eli didn't answer right away. He glanced down at his boots, then out at the children again. "Used to. When my brother died, I figured that was the end of it. Some doors shut permanent. Some open when you least expect," she said quietly. Sarah tilted her head. "You ever think about having your own?" They started building the chicken shed that same week. The old one had rotted through on one side and let in foxes. Eli cut the timber, Sarah measured and braced, and the boys drove the nails crooked but proud. Josie painted the door blue with leftover milk paint, streaking more of it across her arms and chin than the wood. "You're good with them," Eli said one afternoon, watching Sarah work with Josie at her side, gently guiding her strokes. "I had to be," she said. "There wasn't anyone else." "There is now." She looked up, surprised by the certainty in his voice. He didn't say it with insistence, just fact. That night, after the children slept and the house lay still, she stood in the doorway to the barn, watching him oil the plow harnesses. The lantern cast shadows across his arms, long and lean. She stepped in, boots soft on straw. "You're good with them," Eli said one afternoon, watching Sarah work with Josie at her side, gently guiding her strokes. He looked up. "Catch? The part where it goes wrong, where you turn cruel, where I break something I can't fix." Eli set down the rag, wiped his hands. "I've had enough broken for one life," he said. "I got no use for more of it." She stepped closer. "And if I don't know how to do this right? If all I know is fear and grit and running? Then we learn it together," he said. They stood like that for a long time. Then he took her hand. Not with hunger, not with urgency, just quiet, honest presence. She did not pull away. It was a Sunday when the preacher came. Tall man with a limp and a Bible bound in threadbare leather. He rode in from the next town over, following rumor and invitation. Eli met him at the gate. Sarah watched from the window, hands tight in her lap. Later, the preacher sat in the parlor, drinking coffee and nodding at the children as they peeked around corners. He turned to Sarah and Eli and said, "I hear you're building something good here. That true?" Sarah looked at Eli, then back at the preacher. "We're trying," he smiled. "That's all the Lord asks." The wedding was small, just the 5 of them, plus the preacher, plus the land. Sarah wore a dress she'd mended herself, pale cream with blue stitching. Eli wore his cleanest shirt and shaved the stubble from his cheeks. The children stood close, Josie clutching wildflowers in a bunch. Eli's voice shook only once when he said her name. Sarah didn't cry until later, when the sun was setting and the preacher rode off, and she stood in the field with her hand in his. Not from sadness, not from fear, but from something deeper. The way roots push into new soil. That night, Eli showed her the box. He took it down from the shelf in the barn loft, dust-covered and bound in a strip of old denim. Inside were letters, faded photos, a rusted harmonica, and a carved wooden ring. "My mother's," he said, placing the ring in her palm. "She wore it after my father died. Said it kept her steady." Sarah held it, thumb running across the grain. "Do you want me to wear it?" she asked. "Only if it means something to you." She slipped it on her finger. It fit. Not perfect, but close enough. "Then I will." And when they returned to the house, hand in hand, the light from the window spilled out onto the land like a promise. The summer came in dry and golden, the kind that baked the hills until they split and sang with grasshoppers. The wheat grew brittle in the sun, the blades sharp like razors. Every morning Sarah rose before the light, her back warmed by Eli's sleeping breath, and every night she returned with the weight of work sunk into her bones and the quiet joy of earned rest. Life didn't ease, but it steadied. The kind of steadiness that mattered more than comfort. The kind you could build a future on. Josie learned to read from the books Sarah had salvaged from their old home: a Bible missing Genesis, a copy of Pilgrim's Progress, and an almanac from 4 years prior. Eli made her a chair from scrapwood, carved her name into the back. The boys built a tree platform near the creek, and when Caleb fell from it and split his lip open, he climbed back up with blood still on his chin. Sarah kept a journal now, hidden in the pantry behind a sack of flour. Not of grand thoughts or sweeping emotion, just the days. The weather. What the children had said. What Eli had repaired. Whether the creek had run high or low. Sometimes she wrote down a feeling she couldn't say out loud. Not because she was afraid, but because she was still learning how to speak peace into her own bones. One day, as she watered the garden behind the house, she found Eli kneeling in the soil, coaxing a row of beans through the dry crust. His hands were in the earth up to the wrists. She crouched beside him. "I never asked," she said. "What made you stay here after your brother passed?" He looked up, sweat trailing down his temple. I figured if I left, the land would forget us. Figured somebody had to remember him." She nodded. "And now?" He smiled, small and dry. "Now it remembers something else, too." She reached over, wiped a smudge of dirt from his cheek with her thumb. His eyes softened. That night, when the moon rose full over the fields, she kissed him first. The second letter came in August. This time, it was left at the well. A single sheet, folded once, with no greeting. Only, "I've filed claim. Marriage ain't legal. You'll lose the land, the children. I'm giving you until first frost." Sarah stood there for a long time, wind tugging at her hem. Then she walked inside, found Eli near the stove, and handed it to him without a word. He read it twice, slow. "I'll go to town tomorrow," he said. "Talk to the judge. We'll file everything proper. Get the witnesses. You and the children are staying. That's not a question." "I don't want to bring trouble down on you," she whispered. "You didn't," he said. He did. They spent that evening going through papers, digging up birth records, old ledgers, anything with dates and signatures. Sarah's hands shook as she signed the affidavit that would go to the county clerk, confirming that Micah had abandoned her, that he had been gone for longer than 3 years, that she had not hidden, only waited. "Do you believe it'll hold?" she asked. Eli nodded. "The law's slow, but it ain't blind." Still, she sat awake late into the night. The children curled near her, Eli's breath steady beside her. The wind outside howled like a dog left out too long. Frost came early. The first morning it touched the windows. The hills glittered white and silent under the rising sun. Sarah stepped onto the porch, arms crossed over her shawl, and watched it melt in streaks across the grass. Her breath showed in front of her. She heard the door creak behind her. Eli, barefoot, silent. He handed her a mug of coffee. "You were right," he said. She didn't ask what about. Instead, she said, "I dreamed of a fire last night, but it wasn't the house. It was something leaving, burning up and gone." He nodded slowly. "That's how it goes. The past always tries one more time to burn its way back in." They stood like that, shoulder to shoulder, until the children stirred. Micah came once more, not with a lawyer, not with a gun, just with a saddlebag and his old sneer worn thin. The sheriff rode out with him, spoke to Eli and Sarah in the yard, said the judge upheld the filing, that the claim Micah tried to make wasn't worth the ink. "Seems the past ran out of rope," the sheriff said, tipping his hat. "You folks take care now." Micah didn't speak to Sarah as he left, just looked at her, then at the children playing in the field. Something mean in him broke that day, but not loud. Just a crack, like ice splintering. She watched him ride off until he was dust and memory. Eli came to her side. "It's over," she nodded. "No," she said softly. "It's just beginning." He looked at her. She took his hand. Inside, the hearth crackled, the scent of stew hung in the air, and Josie's laughter carried through the boards like music. The first snow fell quiet. No wind, no warning. Just a slow drift through the dawn, flakes thick as feathers. It covered the barn roof by mid-morning, turned the corral to silence, wrapped the hills in white. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, fingers curled around a steaming mug, watching Eli shovel a path from the porch to the woodpile. Every few minutes, he stopped and shook snow from his hat, looked toward the house like he knew she was watching. Behind her, Josie sat humming at the table, stitching a crude doll dress from one of Sarah's old aprons. Caleb and Benjamin had gone to the barn earlier, pretending to be outlaws hiding treasure in the hay. The house held warm and full. The floor creaked with life. Sarah turned back to the window. The world looked clean, unmarked. She had almost forgotten that could happen. That afternoon, she baked bread with Josie, teaching her how to knead dough until it pushed back, how to wait for it to rise in the warmth of the stove. Eli came in dusted white, his cheeks raw from cold, and stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. "Mail came," he said, setting down a parcel wrapped in oilcloth. Sarah dried her hands, took it. Inside were letters from a cousin back east. Nothing urgent, just slow-moving words from a distant life, and a small package marked to Josie, Caleb, and Benjamin. Inside were pencils, a handful of marbles, and a cloth-bound copy of Robinson Crusoe. Sarah looked up. "Did you ask her to send this?" Eli shook his head. She must have heard you were here. Folks talk. Well, Sarah said, watching Josie tear open the paper, not all talk is bad. Eli leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a smile twitching behind his beard. I reckon we ought to let them write her back. Let her know we're all right. Sarah paused, then said softly, "We are, aren't we?" Eli stepped forward, reached out to brush a loose strand of hair from her face. "We are." Winter bit hard by late December. The creek froze solid, the fence posts warped under the weight of ice, and the sky stayed the color of bruises for days at a time. But inside the house, the stove never went cold, and the warmth they'd built held fast. The children hung pine boughs over the windows. Josie made paper snowflakes. Eli carved toy animals from oak scraps. They spent Christmas gathered close. No tree, no candles, just bread fresh from the oven, the good butter, and laughter that rose louder than the wind. After the children slept, Sarah gave Eli a bundle she'd sewn from canvas and string. Inside was a pair of gloves, stitched from a coat too worn to wear but too fine to throw away. "They're not perfect," she said, "but they'll hold." Eli turned them over in his hands, quiet, then looked at her with something deep and steady in his eyes. "Neither am I," he said, "but I'll hold too." He gave her a small box in return. Inside was a gold locket, dented, simple, no chain, just the piece itself, and a folded slip of paper with her name written in his hand. "I reckon you ought to have something that says you made it, that you lived." She turned it over in her fingers, heart pulling tight. "No picture?" He shook his head. "Didn't want to choose for you. You put what matters in there." She pressed it to her chest. "I already have." By March, the ice began to melt from the edges of the land, and shoots of green clawed their way back through the thaw. The days lengthened, the ground softened. Eli planted potatoes in the southern field. Sarah patched the roof where the snow had split a beam. One evening they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip low. The children were playing near the barn, their voices carried on the wind. "Been thinking," Eli said, "about putting up another room, just something small. Give the boys more space." Sarah nodded. "I was thinking the same, and maybe a cellar. We could store more come fall." Eli chuckled. "We sound like folks who believe they've got time." She turned to him, her face full of quiet certainty. "We do." He reached for her hand. "You still afraid?" She thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But it's different now. I used to fear losing what little I had. Now I fear not living it full enough." "That's the better fear," he said. They sat that way until the sky turned blue-black and the first star blinked on. And when they rose to go inside, Sarah glanced once more across the field, toward the road that had brought her here. It was overgrown now, almost gone. She smiled. Some roads weren't meant to be returned to. In the years to come, they would build more than rooms. They'd plant apple trees that bloomed by the fourth spring, raise a pair of calves that grew into gentle oxen, teach Josie to sew and Benjamin to read. They'd host harvest meals with neighbors who called them family and send letters east that spoke of strong roots and stronger love. And sometimes, when the wind was right, Sarah would sit on that porch, the locket warm against her chest, and remember the question her daughter once asked, "Mom, is this our new home?" She would answer the same, every time, even if no one asked. "Yes, you're safe here." Subscribe to walk further into the silence and the storms, where hearts are tested and found true.